Welcome back to another episode of the Wealth Building for Dummies podcast. My name is Kyle Demian, and I'm joined here with Renji Matthew. And on today's show, we're going to talk about how your home is a terrible investment. At least that's what Grant Cardone praises and what he says, right? So in a second here, we're going to share like a 30-second clip that's from a recent interview that he did where he talks about why he believes a home is a terrible investment. And then Renji and I are just going to go back and forth, have a conversation about it, give our 2 cents, and then we want to let you guys comment in and let us know too. For you guys, what do you think? Is a home a good investment or is it a terrible investment? And we'll let you guys decide for yourself. So with that, let me share my screen and then let's go ahead and play the video.
You said a home is a terrible investment. Isn't that kind of ironic?
It is a terrible investment. There's nothing good about it. Doesn't cash flow. You don't get big tax write-offs because of it. You have no leverage. You're living in it. You're paying for it. Even when the loan's paid, you still got to pay property taxes. Still got to insure it. Still got to maintain it. People get emotional about their house. This is my house. It ain't your house. You're a partner in this house with the state.
So your recommendation to a normal family would be to rent?
Never buy a house, man. Rent. I'm not saying don't own real estate. I'm saying take all the money that you would have spent on that house and invest in real estate that cash flows, that pays you every month. Could be retail, storage, could be land. If you're a farmer or a rancher and you know how to get cows to a cash flow, then do that.
Cool. So he says buying a home is a terrible investment with a big old smile on his face, which I think is hilarious. Right? So first of all, I think number one, you always got to analyze who are you getting advice from and where is their point of view coming from, right? And Renji, Grant Cardone, what does he do? What does he invest in? Apartment complexes, right? And you're muted, Renji. I think I can unmute you. There you go. I know I can unmute you. We learn something new every day. There we go. But he invests in apartment units, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, huge apartment units, not just 10 or less, whatever. But yeah, hundreds of units at a time. So you can look at it in two different perspectives. If you're a business owner and you take what he's talking about and you're traveling a lot like he is, it kind of makes sense. Why invest into a personal home? If you're traveling all the time, you could rent and it's a business expense you could write off. It makes sense, right? But on the other hand, if you're not a business owner and you don't like to do all that, it would be a good investment to get a house, right? Then there's also if you're a business owner and you're traveling all the time, like he is, what he's saying makes sense. But if you're still a business owner and not traveling, you want to always have a place to go back to. Like for us, I like going back home, even if I'm a business owner and we like to travel and stuff, I like to have a place that I like to call home that I can go back to, stuff like that. So I think I see both perspectives, but what are your thoughts? Where do you sit and where do you see on both sides?
Well, obviously, knowing who he is, he's saying this for attention, right? Which he always says attention is the number one asset to have on your side. So I get where he's coming from, where he's saying something that is out there. And I believe, though, that it's incorrect. But at the same time, owning a house isn't cheap. I haven't owned a house myself personally. Over the last 5 years, 5 years ago, I was fresh out of college. I was living with a roommate and we had an apartment. And then I decided to move down to Florida. And so I spent the last few years in Florida. I had an apartment there because I wasn't sure if that was going to be a long-term, commitment or not. And then good thing I didn't have a house potentially because I ended up moving back up to Ohio, which is where I was born and raised, about 6-7 months ago. And now in Ohio, because we made such a quick move, we didn't have a time to find a house. So now we're in an apartment again. So the nice thing about being in an apartment is that it's very flexible. You can easily get out of it, move, relocate if you need to. At the time, I was doing a lot of traveling. Then with COVID, really, everything's kind of settled down and I'm more working from home and doing that. So I can see the benefits to both sides. And I think it's more of just a personal choice. What I did miss out on from not having a home over the last 5 years, though, is the equity and the appreciation of real estate. But, Grant argues and says that your own home doesn't cash flow. So it's not bringing you in extra money, right? You don't get as many tax deductions and tax write-offs as you would if you're an investor owning a home. He also said that you should take that money instead of buying a house for yourself personally. You should take that money and invest into other assets, which is what we talk about, right? Wealth building for dummies is about how to build wealth. And we talk about all the time how you need to get into cash flowing assets. So I think what he doesn't talk about on this video is maybe instead of buying a house for yourself first, for your personal home, maybe buy a house instead that you can put a renter in and start cash flowing and building up your net worth before you go out and buy a house. But like, those are my 2 cents. What do you think, Renji?
Two things. One is, yeah, like you said, buy a home that you can cash flow right away, which would be like a duplex or a triplex or whatever. So you live in one and you're renting out the others. Right there, you got your home and you got income coming in, cash flowing through that property. Another thing you can do, if you are, like, I think this would be great for Grant to do actually, and I'm sure he's doing it already, he just probably doesn't talk about it, but everywhere that you travel, if you look at investment properties, opportunities in that place that you like to travel to, now, whenever you travel there, you live in that place yourself. It's your property. It's in your business, so you don't have to pay for it, right? Now, whenever you're not there, you're just renting it out. So you're cash flowing too, right?
Yeah.
So I think that probably is like the best of both worlds because, like I said, the first option is if you get a duplex, or especially if you're wanting to try to get into passive income, or buying your first property, the best way to do, if we could go back, this is what we would do actually. If me and my wife could go back and start over, this is exactly what we would do. Instead of getting our first home that we did, we would get a duplex or a triplex or a quadplex even, live in one while we rent the other ones out. Now, if you want more protection, you set it up inside an LLC, and that way you have more protection. That way the renters don't know you're the owner or whatever. Have someone else be there to collect the rent, stuff like that, or manage it for you if you don't know anything about managing a property. Which is
sure.
what we do.
Yeah.
And that way your first home is not only somewhere you're living, but it's also providing cash flow, right? And then, like we said, and then eventually you could take it a step further if you're traveling all the time, especially if there's a specific spot you like to go to all the time, find an investment property in that area. That way you can live in that area when you go. It can be an Airbnb that you're using it as an Airbnb, or it could be a rental where you have time periods where you go, and in that time you're staying there. You're not having to worry about paying for it because it's your property. And when you're not there, rent it out the rest of the time, So I think that's probably what sounds the best. It's kind of giving you what Grant is talking about at the same time. And again, he might already be doing this, is just not talking about it too, What
Yeah.
are your thoughts?
For sure. Well, the one thing, as you were talking through that I was thinking about was like, yeah, for your first home purchase, you can use an FHA loan on a duplex, triplex, or up to a quadplex. And for those that don't know, the FHA loan allows you to only put 3.5% down. Where otherwise, if you're going to go and buy, a quadplex after you use your FHA loan, you're going to have to put way more down. So that could be a really smart decision for people that want to get into real estate to use that FHA loan to be able to save the amount of money that they'd have to put down on their first investment, right? So that makes a lot of sense doing something like that. And I think also just buying a home isn't for everybody. Renting isn't for everybody. Some people don't ever want to get into assets and get into real estate, So we would love to hear your guys' thoughts too. As we've kind of talked about both sides, the pros and the cons, because there's not necessarily a right answer. I think most people would lean to saying that your house is an investment because that's kind of what we've all been taught, and your house is an asset. But, kind of breaking down what is the definition of an asset and what's the definition of a liability. Definition of an asset is something that puts money into your pocket. Liability is the definition of something that takes money out of your pocket. And like I said, I've never owned a home before, but I know people that have, and I have friends that have. And what's funny is that they've all said that, when they get a home, it's way more expensive than they thought. There's so much things to fix, right? So they're always talking about money coming out of their pocket, which doesn't align with people saying that your home is also an asset. But at the same time, over time, what happens if you get a mortgage of, let's say, 400,000, you're paying down the mortgage, the value of the home tends to appreciate, right? Depending on the area that you're in. So that appreciation builds your equity. And I think that's where a lot of people say that your house is an asset over time. It's kind of like a savings account, right? You're contributing into your savings account. It increases in value over time. You're paying down the principal. And then from that house, you can do a lot of great things like you've talked about in the past, which is, take equity out of your home to get into real estate, or, you just build equity that you can go take and put down on your next property, right? When you go to get into a bigger, newer home, like most people do, right? Especially if your family's expanding. So with that, I think, any other ideas, Renji?
No, like you mentioned, that's exactly what we did. We had equity in our house, and so if you're someone that owns a home and don't know how to get into your first passive income opportunity, you could do what we did. Got an equity line of credit on our house because we were paying down on the house, and used that to buy our first couple properties. So in that sense, it's an asset because you're using it to leverage it to buy assets, right? And like Kyle mentioned, let's say your value goes up. Now when you sell it, you're making more money back too. So in that sense, also it's an asset. And one thing that Grant mentioned on there, that you don't own the home or whatever, you're paying property tax and stuff, which you're paying property tax no matter what type of investment property you have. The difference is inside a business, you could write it off because it's an expense. Under the personal, it's not easy to write off as many things, right? So so that's another benefit of having it as a business. You can write off so many more things because there's more tax code that helps you write off things as a business owner. So I think that's the only thing I want to add to that.
Somebody put in the comments too, paying rent is money spent on something that isn't producing any cash flow too. Am I right? Am I missing something? Which is a good point.
Sure.
Absolutely. There's a cost of living, right?
Yeah, it's actually exactly right there. The only difference is as a business owner, that cost could be written off too. Which is what Grant is doing. He's traveling for business all the time. So because he's always constantly traveling, all of that rent he pays could be used as a business expense. Meanwhile, if you're not a business owner and you're traveling, you can't write that stuff off you know, you could use some depending on the company you're working for, different things like that, but it's not anything like a business owner doing like Grant is doing.
For sure. And actually, one more thing that I'm thinking of now that's actually pretty interesting. I've seen, I think, Bigger Pockets and maybe Zillow talking about it too, but just like in most US cities right now, it's actually cheaper to rent than it is to buy. So like I said, we keep going back and forth. I do think, a house is not a terrible investment. But at the same time, renting may be cheaper, right? So it just depends on where you're at, what your goals are, whether or not you ever even want to get into real estate or get into owning assets in the first place, right? But for you guys, would love to know your thoughts. So in the comments below, let us know. Is a home a good investment or is it a terrible investment? And maybe what your experiences are. And as always, make sure to like and subscribe and then follow us on our social platforms. We'll have our TikTok and Instagram linked here. And we look forward to seeing you guys on the next show. Take care.